Legend of Total War here, and today we're doing another tier list using Tier Maker, this time going through all of the Legendary Lord defeat traits that you could obtain in Total War Warhammer 3, Immortal Empires. There are currently 96 Legendary Lords in the game, and there are actually more than 96 potential Legendary Lord defeat traits, and we'll go through all of them. I'll be organizing this race by race, so I'll be putting timestamps in the description so that you can go through the timeline if you want and find the specific information that you'll be looking for, because I imagine this video is probably going to be longer than an hour, and it'll just make it easier to navigate for those that are looking for specific information. You know, if you're wondering what the defeat trait is of a Legendary Lord as you're playing through your campaign, this might be a good video for you to have up, and just I'll let you know my thoughts and whether or not I think it's an S tier or you know, potentially a D tier defeat trait. I'll also be going through the Total War Warhammer wiki, because that's another place you can get information on the traits that you can obtain. However, some of the information on the wiki is actually significantly outdated, and so when there's an outdated entry in the wiki, I'll mention that and tell you what it actually is. I've gone through and basically double-checked all of the defeat traits. I'm fairly sure all of my information is correct, but if I do get anything wrong, do feel free to correct me in the comments below so that I can update it in a future video, because I imagine 2 years from now I'm probably going to have to make another one of these as more Legendary Lords will be added, and I do expect many of these defeat traits to get changed. As we have seen, sometimes super powerful defeat traits can be nerfed into oblivion. I know who I'm looking at there. You know, pretty disappointing when that happens, but what I would really like to see is some of these D tier defeat traits get a bit of a buff, because some of them are pretty bloody useless. Alright, let's get into it now, starting with the Beastmen. So, starting with Khazrak One Eye, he provides the defeat trait Beast Scourge, ambush defense chance plus 20%, chance of intercepting an army using the Underway, Beast Path, or World Routes by 20%. So I don't want to spend too long on each one of these, or else this is going to go way over an hour. But some will require a little bit more explanation than others. Now, ambush defense chance is not going to be something that is going to be active all the time, but when it does activate, you're going to be glad that it did, because this could be the difference between you getting ambushed or not getting ambushed. You might be able to block the ambush, because let's just say the ambush success chance was 50%. Having this reduces it down to 30%, giving you more of a chance to basically not get your army totally wrecked. Now, no matter what faction you're playing as, nobody wants to get ambushed, but some factions suffer more from it than others. If you've got a lot of artillery or missile units in your army, those are the ones that suffer the most. So armies like the Empire suffer the most from being ambushed. The Dwarves now have a lot of things that they can do naturally to increase their ambush defense chance, but more always benefits them. And factions like WarriorsOfChaos, they're less prone to being worried about being ambushed. It's more a case of sort of getting lightning struck or getting dogpiled on armies you didn't see coming. And it's always good to have ambush defense chance when going up against Skaven. I'm going to put this one here at A tier, because I think defense chance for ambushes is highly desirable, especially for newer players. Because otherwise you have to really keep an eye out on potential ambush activations, I guess. Then there's Malagor the Dark Omen with the trait Crow Reaver, which provides leadership plus 10. And melee attack plus 10 when fighting against Beastmen warherds. This is useless, because, well, it's not totally useless. It only applies to the Lord, and it's only when fighting against Beastmen, which they are not a common enemy to fight. And providing that boost just for the Lord is fairly low impact. And again, because it's situational, just utter trash. I mean, there is defeat traits that provide like that amount of melee attack all the time. So it's just not very good at all. Definitely a D tier one. Then we've got Morga the Shadowgave with Skull Slasher, providing missile resistance plus 15%. This, I think, is a very hireable stat buff, because in Warhammer 3 currently, on all difficulties, the AI will try to shoot at your Lord now, even if it is a small single entity. And so missile resistance will just allow you to reduce the amount of damage you take from missiles. And most armies will have some missile units in the game. There's very few armies that will just have none. So I'm going to put this one at A tier above Khazrak One Eye. I don't think it truly belongs in S tier. Maybe if it was its original defeat trait, which was 30% missile resistance, it would belong there. I just think that there are significantly better defeat traits out there. But I'm going to try to layer the each individual ranking. So I think this one's better than Khazrak's, because you'll get used to it. You'll get use of it more often than Khazrak's. Then we've got Taurox the Brass Bull with Brass Bull Glass Jaw, armor piercing weapon damage plus 20 and charge bonus plus 15%. not very high stat boost. So most lords in the game will probably have more than 200, definitely more than 200, like 3 or 400 weapon strength. So getting an extra 20 is not even really a 10% boost. In most cases, it won't reduce the number of hits. So in the vast majority of cases, it won't reduce the number of hits needed to defeat an enemy character by one or more hits. So very low impact. You kind of need to couple this with other defeat traits and other stat buffs in order to really get any benefit out of it. And while the stat itself is very useful, it's just a very small stat boost. So I'm going to put this one at C tier and just move on from there. Then Bretonnia, we've got Luan Leonco. Now he's actually got 2 defeat traits. So the vast majority of the time that you defeat him, you'll get the trait Kingslayer, which provides charge bonus plus 10 and recruitment cost minus 20% for cavalry units Lord's army. Now that's if you defeat him as anyone other than Bretonnia. If you fight him as Bretonnia, you get the trait Traitor, which provides minus 5 chivalry per turn, weapon strength plus 20%, and increased upkeep cost plus 10% for all units in the Lord's army, which is actually a very bad defeat trait. But chances are, if you're playing as a Bretonnian faction, you're probably not actually going to go at war with Luan Leoncoeur, except in the most extreme cases. So unless you're deliberately trying to screw things up, you're probably not going to get it. So we're just going to rank the Kingslayer trait there. The charge bonus is okay. I kind of consider weapon strength to be of higher value, and also in most cases, I guess it depends on how much, because 15% could end up being more than 10 in some cases, and less in others. It just depends on what the percentage is. And recruitment cost reduction for cavalry units, pretty low impact. I'd say it's maybe slightly better than Taurox's defeat trait, but not by very much. Then we've got Alberic de Bordelou, who has the trait, or provides the trait, Hammer and Anvil, which provides melee attack plus 15 for the Lord when fighting at sea. So that's not very impactful because you're not going to be fighting at sea that often. It's mainly going to be for sea encounters and for those pirate rebel factions. I'd say it's D tier. I'd maybe put it above Malagor's defeat trait, but they're definitely like right on par with each other there. Definitely a D tier trait. It's just not even going to make use of it most of your campaign. Then you've got Repanse de Lyonesse with the trait End of an Errant. Growth plus 5 local province, double experience gain for units when fighting against Bretonnia, all units in the army, and research rate plus 5% faction-wide. Now the 5% faction-wide research rate, that's really useful. There are lords out there that will provide a defeat trait that provides more than that, so she's just going to fall under S tier, at A tier. I think the growth bonus is definitely good as well, but these are fairly low. It's a really good bonuses, just not a whole lot of it compared to some of these others. I'm going to put it in between Morgur and Kazrak there. Because again, there are others that provide more research rate. But what you can do is defeat Repanse and disband the character, and you still have the research rate. She's definitely a character worth farming her defeat trait if you're playing as TombKings, since they kind of desperately need that research rate to get their stuff unlocked. Then we've got the Fey Enchantress with providing the defeat trait, the Witchfinder General, which provides casualty replenishment rate plus 10% for the Lord's army. This is universally desirable. There is no army in the game that's not going to take damage, especially not in the early stage of the campaign. And if you're in areas where you're in like red territory, so you've got like a replenishment debuff, having the Fey Enchantress's defeat trait can really help to mitigate that. This could be the difference for your army between victory and defeat in between successive wars or successive battles where you're fighting a lot of battles over a number of turns. Being able to replenish more means that you'll be able to get 10% more of your army back every single turn. It's also important to note that the maximum casualty replenishment rate is 50%. It can't go above that, although in most cases it takes a lot of effort to actually get to that 50%. So having her defeat trait is going to be highly desirable for any lord in the game. Then we've got the ChaosDwarfs. So Astrogoth Ironhand has got provides the defeat trait Astrogon. He provides spell resistance plus 15% for the lord, and then has another pretty weird effect where he increases the effect duration and the effect range for spells for the Lords of Hashut, Death, Fire, and Metal by 10%. This is extremely obscure because it's only for the Lord, and most Lords in the game are not Lords of Hashut, Death, Fire, and Metal. There are a few generic lords, and there's a couple of legendary lords that definitely have those laws, but that's very situational, and it's just a bit weird, like effect duration and effect range. It's just a bit of a weird one. So the main one that I want to rank there is the spell resistance. That's definitely good for sure. Spell resistance plus 15%. I'm going to put that one at B tier because spell resistance isn't what magic resistance used to be in Warhammer 2. It doesn't block magical weapons, but it'll be very useful for your lord if you're about to go up against Archaon, since he has a habit of overcasting Spirit Leech from halfway across the map and specifically targeting your lord. Reducing the damage done to your lord by 15% for that is very, very good for dealing with characters like him. And the AI does tend to get a lot of Spirit Leech characters if they're available to them, so that can be fairly useful. So not super desirable, but at the same time could save your life in some situations. Then you've got Drazoath the Ashen with the trait, or providing the trait, Detowered. Income from settlement buildings plus 10% faction-wide when on the map. So the character can't be disbanded in order to get that effect, and also provides missile resistance plus 15%. So in regard to Morgur's defeat trait, 15%, missile resistance, this is just straight up better than it because it also provides income. Now, if you're playing as a faction that doesn't have supply lines, so Bretonnia, Warriors of Chaos, and ChaosDwarfs, this is one of the best traits that you can possibly go for, and it's well worth farming it because what you can do is get a whole bunch of generic lords to get this defeat trait and just keep them active on the map. You don't even have to give them armies, and they will essentially provide you an increasing amount of income as you get more and more settlements, because the settlements will provide loads of income for you, just the settlement building, especially if you're playing as Warriors of Chaos. So very useful for them. Now, the Beastmen don't have supply lines, but at the same time, they also they don't have any income from their building, so it's kind of useless for them. And again, missile resistance is straight up better. Straight up good. So we're going to put him at S tier. It's one of the best defeat traits in the game. In fact, I'd even go so far as to say it might even be better than the Fey Enchantress there, because you're always going to want money. And even if you're not farming the defeat trait, having a lord with the 10% income from all settlement buildings, that's going to provide you a decent amount of income from just about every single faction. So that's really good. Okay, then we've got Zatan the Black with Labored. This provides magic item drop chance plus 40%, which is pretty damn huge, and range plus 15% for artillery units for the own army. And that's situational. It depends on your army. So if you've got artillery in the army, that's really good. But if you don't have artillery in the army, not so good. It doesn't provide anything. But the magic item drop chance is always going to be useful. Even if they're dropping trashy items, you can always just fuse them. So I think this is a really good defeat trait. I'm going to put it at A tier, below Kazarak's defeat trait there. Because again, it's fairly situational, and it probably won't save your ass in a lot of situations. But it is always good to have more range on the artillery. Again, it depends on what you value. Then we've got the Demons of Chaos with the DaemonPrince with the Slayer of the God Slayer trait. It provides diplomatic relations plus 20 with Kislev, and attrition minus 20% casualties suffered from all attrition, Lord's army. So any type of attrition, I think including bankruptcy attrition. I'm not 100% sure on that as well. Although if you're suffering from bankruptcy attrition, that's a bit of a worry. Anyway, so good defeat trait, better for Kislev than anyone else, but I'd say it's probably along the lines of a B tier defeat trait. Because most of the time my armies are not suffering attrition, but its location is fairly good because he's in the Chaos Waste, so that's usually where if you're going to suffer attrition, you're going to suffer it there. Because even if you strip away all the Chaos Corruption, you still suffer attrition there. I'd maybe put it above Astrogoth's defeat trait there, just a little bit, but it definitely doesn't belong in A tier. Then we've got the DarkElves. So Rakarth provides the defeat trait, Beastmaster of None. Bonus versus large plus 8. Leadership minus 5 for enemy monstrous units, enemy armies in the local province. So bonus versus large, let me just explain that stat a little bit. It's not just weapon strength boost, it's also a melee attack boost when fighting against those large units. The most dangerous units in the game will most likely be a large unit, so having your lord being able to take out those characters that are on mounts or if they're big monsters is very valuable. There's definitely characters that provide bigger bonus versus large buffs, but also coupling that with minus 5 leadership for enemy monstrous units, that's very good as well. So I think that this one here is a lower end A tier defeat trait, below Zatan the Black. Then we've got Lokia Felhart with the providing the defeat trait Black Arc Down. which provides immune to Storm and Reef Attrition Lord's Army. I consider this to be insanely low impact because you're only going to be suffering Storm and Reef Attrition if you're crossing through the oceans and through the oceans, and most of the time you're not going to be doing that. And the amount of attrition that you usually take from that is very low. So this is usually only really good if you're about to go and assault the Dread Fleet. They're at the Maelstrom. I'm going to put this at D tier just because of how very infrequently this is going to provide you any benefit and how little those benefits are actually going to be. So very low value there. The worst one so far. But trust me, there's worse. Then we're moving on to Morathi. She provides the defeat trait Hag Butcher. Reduces hero action cost minus 10% for all heroes faction-wide. Now this is very useful for HighElves specifically because you should be using your nobles to claim influence, which requires an agent action, which costs money. So getting that down will save you a lot of cash. Now the HighElves eventually become fairly rich, so not that big of a deal in the later stages of the campaign, but in the early stages it can be fairly good. As for every other faction, it really depends on your particular playstyle. If you're using your heroes to block enemy armies to gather research, that's going to be very useful for them. Assassinating characters. It also provides hero self-defense plus 10% chance of wounding enemy aggressors, but that's for the heroes in the local province, so that's much lower impact. I think this is a pretty good defeat trait, not anything game-breaking. Definitely something that you could either take it or leave it. I'd probably put it at the higher end of B tier above the DaemonPrince, because it is a global bonus, but I think it's not a great global bonus. Anyway, then moving on to Malekith. He provides a defeat trait, Immortal Unbeloved, which provides income from raiding plus 10% for Lord's Army, which that's actually a really interesting stat boost because the faction that is most likely going to be fighting against Malekith is the HighElves. The HighElves don't raid. They can't do it. So they can't make use of that part of the defeat trait at all. But he also provides passive ability Frenzy. So that will significantly boost the strength of the Lord. So what Frenzy does, it provides melee attack plus 10, immune to psychology, weapon strength and charge bonus plus 10%. Very useful for your Lord if they're actually going into combat. And Frenzy is activated as long as their leadership is above 50%. So if they're a bit of a coward, they're not going to get activation of that for the full course of the battle. But still, pretty good stat buff there. Most useful for any characters that are really going into combat. But also, the raiding is going to be very useful for characters like Greenskins and Norsca, who don't use up any movement range to go into raid stance and make a ton of money from raid stance. So I'm going to put this one here at A tier. I'm going to put it above Rakarth because I think that Frenzy is better than bonus versus large, because melee attack plus 8 against everything is kind of better than bonus versus large, which is only against large units, because basically it's 2 extra points than it has. But although bonus versus large is also weapon strength, but it's only a small amount. That being said, Frenzy also provides 10% weapon strength, so it depends on how you look at it. Then you've got Malice Darkblade, providing the defeat trait Malice in Underworld. Armor piercing weapon damage plus 30. So again, it's not a hell of a lot. It's a little bit more than what Taurox provides, although Taurox also provides charge bonus. I'm going to say it's slightly better than Taurox's. It largely depends on how much you value charge bonus and how much you're cycle charging. But it does provide a little bit extra damage over Taurox's. If you get both of them, hey, you got plus 50 weapon strength, armor piercing, and that is where it starts to get a little bit more significant. If you get both of them. And there's still more that will provide weapon strength as well. It largely depends on what you want to be doing with your character. But again, not a super... it's a good stat, just not very much of it. Then we've got the day after. That's Khorne Hellebond's defeat trait, the day after. And she provides armor piercing weapon damage plus 20, but she also provides melee attack plus 5. Now, I think that melee attack plus 5 is more impactful than armor piercing weapon damage plus 20, because melee attack plus 5 basically increases your chance to hit by 5%. Now the cap on that is 92%, so there's always a chance that you will miss a hit, and you've always got at a very minimum an 8% chance to hit, even if your melee attack is absolute 0. So increasing the chance to hit and the damage kind of complements each other. So I think that her defeat trait is significantly better. But when we take into consideration Malekith's defeat trait, he's providing plus 10 melee attack, as long as you've got the Frenzy active, then I think that this one is somewhere between these two. I'm going to put it above Astrogoth, above the Demon Princes, but below Marathis. It's sort of in between all of them there. Because it's a good defeat trait, you know, especially for characters in that area, like Sigvald and Valkyr, that can really make use of that extra melee attack. Then we're moving on to the Dwarves. So Belegar Ironhammer provides the defeat trait King Hammer, and this provides leadership +4 during subterranean intercept battles and melee attack +10 during subterranean intercept battles for the Lord that gets a defeat trait. This is trash because most of the time you're not going to have subterranean intercept battles. They're just not that common. And it only provides the boost to the Lord. It's just trash. I'd say it's probably better than Lockheed's defeat trait, though. Probably better than the Beastmen one, actually. You're probably going to be having more intercept battles than you will Beastmen battles, but still, just absolute trash tier trait there. And then we move on to Grombrindles. Oh boy, this one. So he provides the defeat trait Beardhammer. Attribute, causes terror when fighting against dwarves. Now, I was really hoping that Creative Assembly would update the dwarf defeat traits in the with the DLC that just happened with Thrones of Decay, but none of them got updated. And some of these are some of the worst defeat traits in the game. And this one here, it's worse than Lockheed's, because here's the thing about terror when fighting against dwarves. Dwarves have very high leadership in general. They're very hard to break, especially on the higher battle difficulties. And some of their units, actually quite a lot of their units, have immune to psychology in the first place. And immune to psychology makes terror useless. Now, another thing is that it only provides this attribute for the Lord. And most Lords in the game have terror by default, or can get terror by default. Because they've got a mount that can get terror, or they've got an item that gets them terror. Or another thing is that most Lords in the game that don't have access to terror are usually not the nemesis of dwarfs. So it's like the factions that you are most likely to fight are going to get it. They're going to fight the dwarfs. Are most likely going to get it before they even fight the dwarfs. It's just an utterly useless defeat trait, providing zero impact. And even if you got terror, it very rarely activates on the dwarfs because of their high leadership. Because terror only activates on them when their leadership drops below 13, and dwarfs will oftentimes fight to the bloody death, you know. So this is not very useful at all. Anyway, moving on to Thorek Ironbrow, we got Old Grumpslayer, the defeat trait. Magic item drop chance +15% and armor piercing weapon damage +3 for the Lord's army. So this is providing a Lord-wide buff, which is definitely a better bonus than if it's just providing for the Lord. Providing +3 weapon strength for the entire army is better than +20 or 30 for just the Lord, because you're applying this to potentially 20 units. Now, if you're using multi-entity units that have low weapon strength, for example, let's just say you're playing as the Greenskins and you're rolling around with goblins, right? And you've got 120 entities in each of those units. Each one of those guys has just increased their weapon strength by maybe 10 to even 20% in some cases because of its armor piercing. So in those cases, it's very desirable. But if you're rolling around with an army that has like loads of heroes, or it's a Rider Primeval Glory army, the armor piercing weapon damage is going to be next to nothing. So it's a good buff in certain situations. Also not going to be particularly useful if your army is full of missile units. But I'd say that this is still an A tier defeat trait just because of the magic item drop chance. It is lower than Zatan the Blacks. So I'm going to put it above Malachus, but below Zatan's there. Then we've got Thorgrim Grudgebearer providing the defeat trait Grudge Killer. This is an S tier defeat trait. Now, it provides reduced construction cost 10% for all buildings, local province, which is really good, reducing your costs. And research rate plus 10% faction-wide. So this is why Reparts didn't get S tier, is because Thorgrim basically has double the bonus that she provides. Again, with these characters that get the defeat trait, you can disband them and they'll still provide that bonus. They won't provide the construction cost reduction, but the research rate they'll still be able to provide. And research rate is good for every single faction in the game, except for you, because you're the only one without a tech tree. And I guess it's also not useful for factions that finish their tech tree. You don't need research rate when you're done. It would be good if they implemented some kind of like rolling unlimited technology that provides a small amount of buff. You know, once you finish your tech tree, maybe they'll do that eventually. But there's no sign of that at the moment. Anyway, moving on to Ungrim Iron Fist, he provides the defeat trait Slayer King Slayer, melee attack +5, spell resistance +5%, and missile resistance +5%. Similar tier, I think, to Morgur's defeat trait, because he's providing 15% in total of missile resistance. And if you add all this up, it's kind of 15 extra stat boosts. And it's more spread out, which could actually be a bit more useful than just hyper-focusing on one thing. So I'm going to put Ungrim above Morgur here. But when it comes to melee attack, it really depends. Like, if you're using a Spellcaster Lord, then melee attack's not that useful. But spell resistance and missile resistance are always going to be useful. Then we've got Malachi McCason with Slayer Engineer, providing recruit rank +3 for artillery units, and missile strength +10% for the Lord's Army. Now, missile strength +10 for the Lord's Army, again, depends on you having missile units. So some factions, if you're rolling around with a melee-focused army, you're not really going to need this at all. But if you're playing as Elspeth, for example, and you're using loads of guns, then you're going to want this trait pretty much more than anything else. So it's very much army-dependent on what you're building. But every faction in the game, short of like Slaanesh, is able to build some kind of missile units. So pretty desirable. But where would we put it? I wouldn't go so far as to put it S tier. I mean, it is a Lord-wide buff, but I just don't think it's good enough to go into S tier. But it's very close. I'd probably go at the very top of A tier, just above Ungrim there. That's where I'd put it. Okay, moving on to Grand Cathay. We've got Miao Ying providing the defeat trait Very Cold, Still Aloof. This provides expert charge defense for the Lord, and melee defense +3 for the entirety of the Lord's army. So again, across potentially 20 units. Now, melee defense +3 is something that's going to benefit every single army, no matter what they are. Even if you've got a missile unit-based army, that's going to provide benefit for you. Because the most dangerous armies for a missile-based army is something that rushes at you. And having your units being able to hold them back a little bit better, everyone's going to benefit from that in the army. So this is actually an S tier defeat trait, but she's not providing any global bonuses, so I think that the other ones here are better. Now, just because something is providing a global bonus doesn't automatically means it's better than a Lord-wide buff. For example, here, it depends on how much is being provided. And when it comes to missile strength versus melee defense there, I just kind of think that the melee defense is just going to be more widely useful. But, you know, if you've got a missile-based army, then you're probably going to desire this one more than Miao Ying. But if you don't have a missile-based army, that one's going to be more desirable. But, again, if you've got a missile-based army, it's still desirable. So, anyway. Every Lord, like, I can't compare every single defeat trait to every single Lord. That's, oh my god, 96 times 96. No thanks. Then we've got Zhao Ming. Merciless to Ming is the defeat trait. He provides magic item drop chance +10% and armor +5 for the Lord's army. So again, providing a Lord-wide, for an army-wide buff, very useful, but I consider that melee defense +3 is a bit higher value than armor +5. And also the magic item drop chance +10% is kind of better than expert charge defense. So overall, I'd say that they're both S tier, pretty much exactly on par with each other. I put him a little bit lower though. Then we've got Yuan Bo, who provides a defeat trait, One Dragon Down. Winds of Magic cost -20% for all spells. Well, this is obviously, come on, it's pretty obviously a D tier trait, right? I mean, nobody casts spells. Nobody wants to have cheaper spells. Duh. No, this is obviously the best defeat trait pretty much in the game, because the only factions that can't make use of it are ones that can't cast spells. So that being Khorne and the Dwarfs. They can cast spells, but they don't use Winds of Magic. Everyone else, this is going to be super desirable because magic is still one of the most potent ways to kill the enemy army in the entire game, and being able to essentially cast more spells is going to give your army that has it more potency, especially considering you don't have to be a spellcaster lord. You can be a melee lord that has a spellcaster in the army, and because it's reduces Winds of Magic cost for everyone in the army. Extremely good defeat trait. I'm actually surprised that one didn't get nerfed in the last few patches, because that's insanely powerful. There are some situations where this can allow you to cast spells for free, so very desirable. Then we move on to the Greenskins, where we've got Grimgore Ironhide providing the defeat trait Hide Striker. It's another one that's providing armor-piercing weapon damage +20 and armor +10. Pretty much same as these guys, it's just the same defeat trait with it slightly shuffles here and there. In between these two, you go. No need to really dwell on that one any further. Skarsnik provides the defeat trait Sneaky Smiter, which provides ambush success chance plus 20% and ambush defense chance plus 20%. So comparing that one to Khazrax, I think this one is more valuable significantly, because not only are you defending against ambushes, you're going to be able to succeed in your own ambushes, which is a very powerful mechanic in the game. And I'm sure many of you can express, I've seen the disappointment in setting up an ambush and the army just come into your zone of control and your ambush just didn't succeed. So having his defeat trait before you go into ambush stance can be very useful. This is the best defeat trait for the Skaven, in my opinion, and for the Beastmen. For those two factions, actually more desirable than getting Yuan Bo's defeat trait. So very, very desirable defeat trait, that one, for every faction. Because nobody wants to be ambushed, and everybody wants to succeed in their ambushes. Okay, then we move on to Wurzag, the Great Green Prophet, who provides Great Green Killer as a defeat trait, which provides physical resistance plus 10%. Now, in Warhammer 2, physical resistance was a bit more desirable than it is now, because you used to be able to very easily block magical attacks, and so physical attacks were actually the ones that were more common and were more dangerous. But now magical attacks are a little bit more common, and spell resistance doesn't block magical attacks. So physical resistance, don't get me wrong, still really useful, just not as useful as it used to be. And there's also other things that you can do to increase your physical resistance beyond this one. So it's still a really good one. But I would have put it as S tier in Warhammer 2. But in Warhammer 3, I'd say it's comparable with, definitely better than Morgur's defeat trait. Because if the missile attack is not a magical attack, it'll still block it. I'll put it above Ungrim, but below Malachi there. Then we've got Grom the Paunch with Weight Watcher. He provides Diplomatic Relation plus 10 with HighElves, and Attribute causes terror when fighting against Greenskins. Now, causing terror against the Dwarfs, total shit. But causing terror against Greenskins is another matter, because the Dwarves have very high leadership, but the Greenskins don't. The Greenskins like 2/3 of what the Dwarves have as leadership. So it's a lot easier to activate terror against Greenskins. And also, the enemies that the Greenskins are likely to have aren't going to naturally be terrifying, as opposed to the Dwarves. So you're probably not, like, more of your characters are going to be like human characters. So this is a bit more desirable on that front. And then diplomatic relations with the HighElves. The factions that are likely to fight Grom the Paunch are likely to be friendly with the HighElves. Like, it's most likely going to be Empire or Bretonnia that fights the Grom the Paunch, and they're going to be relatively friendly with the HighElves. So this is reasonably desirable. It works for them. So I'm going to put this one here at the back end of B tier, because it's a good bonus if you want to make use of it, but it's definitely not something that you essentially need to get. It's very good for the HighElves for sure, because that's good for getting those confederations as early as possible without having to spend influence or money. So it's good for them. But again, back end of B tier for that one. Then Azag the Slaughterer provides the trait Greenskinner, which is 30% spell resistance. Now in Warhammer 2, that would have been an S tier defeat trait, because magical weapons would have been reduced in damage by 30%, and that's a huge amount as well. But in Warhammer 3, it's just spells. Now, he's fairly close to Archaon, similar to Astrogoth Ironhand. So combining both of these defeat traits before you go and fight Archaon can really make his annoying spirit leeches significantly less impactful for you. So in those cases there, I think it's important to, give him an A tier just above Zatan the Black, because, sorry, no, Astrogoth. Where's Astrogoth? Put Astrogoth here at B tier. It is double the amount that he provides. So I'm actually going to put him at the very top of B tier there, above Marathi there. Yeah, because he provides double the amount. I know Astrogoth also has some other stuff that he provides, but that's not super impactful. Okay, then moving on to the HighElves, we've got Tyrion providing the defeat trait Ulthuan Undefended, which provides melee attack +2 for the Lord's army, recruit rank +1 for all units for the Lord's army. So recruit rank's alright, it's very good if you're recruiting an army, but if you've defeated Tyrion, then you've probably already recruited an army, so I don't know, if you need to re-recruit something could be useful, but the melee attack +2 is fairly good. And that's comparable with Miao Ying's defeat trait of melee defense +3. I consider melee attack and melee defense at a 1-to-1 ratio, the same value, but Miao Ying provides more. I'm going to put Tyrion in between Zhao Ming, and Miao Ying. Maybe that's why I was thinking of Imrik, because I was looking at Miao Ying. Anyway, next up is Teclis. He provides a defeat trait, Ruin Unrestrained. Now, this is the first case of the defeat trait in the wiki being incorrect. It says Winds of Magic Power Reserve change plus 10% when increasing. Now, that stat has been removed from the game entirely. Thank God, because that was awful. Because Winds of Magic Power Reserve change plus 10% when increasing. That means if you were in a region that was plus 10 Winds of Magic, it would give you an extra 1 Winds of Magic per turn. Total bloody useless, basically. And if you weren't in anything else, it wasn't doing anything for you. So now it provides Winds of Magic Power Reserve Capacity plus 10. So you used to be able to just get that Winds of Magic instantly in Warhammer 2, but now you have to actually channel it. But that's fine. It's not difficult to do that in most cases. So I'd say that this is an A tier defeat trait, but at the back end of A tier, below recast defeat trait there, because like 10 Winds of Magic, that's great, but it's not a huge amount extra, really. And again, you still have to channel it. And there's other defeat traits in here that will provide Winds of Magic, among other bonuses as well. So when comparing that to Teclis is just not quite on par with them. And then let's move on to Alithana, where his defeat trait is Shadow's Fall. This one is Hero Action Cost minus 15% local region, and Hero Action Success Chance plus 10% local region. So unless you've got a hero following that particular lord around after defeating Alithana that's going around like blocking and assassinating, I'd say that you're not going to get any impact from that whatsoever. But you could do that. That's definitely not an unviable option. But I imagine most people probably don't do that. So I'm going to put this at D tier, but it's at the top end of D tier, because I imagine most people just probably aren't going to make use of it. But, 10% extra success chance, that's not too bad. If you need to block enemy armies, assassinate a character, like if you're going up against a legendary hero right before a battle, having someone have a 10% extra chance of assassinating them, that could save your ass. You never know. But you'd have to sort of plan your strategy around getting that as well, so it's a bit low impact. Then we've got Alariel the Radiant, providing the defeat trait Never Queen, which provides control plus 4 local province, chance of Winds of Magic increasing in strength changing chance of Winds of Magic increasing in strength when changing plus 5% local province. So that means that every 5 or 10 turns, I'm not sure exactly, Winds of Magic changes in a province. It goes from blowing to low or whatever. There's 5 different states that it can be in. And this just increases the chance of it going up as opposed to going down. But 5% is extremely low impact. And again, not something that you want to focus on. This is not something that has changed. This is actually currently updated as opposed to Teclis' defeat trait. But that's just a bit of a weird one that honestly just isn't really going to provide you impact. What you could do if you really wanted is get 20 lords to get that defeat trait, put them all in the province, and then you got a 100% chance of increasing the Winds of Magic when it increases. But it's just weird to do that. And then you've also got growth plus 10 local province. So I reckon the control and the growth local province is the main benefit from Alariel's defeat trait. So if you're going around conquering territory, that can be really good to get the settlement built up again really quickly and make sure the public order stays nice and high, because it's always good to keep your public order good. So it's not undesirable, but I think it's no one's gonna drool over this one. So I'm gonna put it at B tier, but I'm gonna put it above Grom the Paunches, and maybe put it behind Hellebron here, but above the DaemonPrince. Okay, moving on to Eltharion the Grim. He provides a defeat trait Misspiercer, which provides missile resistance plus 10% and charge resistance, charge defense versus large for the Lord there. Okay, so we've already got Lords that provide missile resistance. So Morgr is providing 15. I think that this isn't quite as good as what Morgr provides. So I'm going to put it at B tier behind Azag here. Then again, sometimes missile resistance is better than spell resistance, because in some cases missile resistance is spell resistance, like Fireball and Shem's Burning Gaze, for example. They're actually counted as missile attacks and magical attacks, so they'll actually block those spells. Yeah, alright. Even though it's only 1/3 of what Azag provides, missile resistance, in my opinion, is better than spell resistance. But again, I'm really iffy on that. I'm putting them basically right next to each other, so I'm just really iffy on it. And also you got the charge defense versus large, which that's okay, I guess. And then Imrik provides the defeat trait Dragon Slayer. Bonus versus large plus 8, and fire resistance plus 25. So we've already got plus 8 with Rakarth here, and I think the fire resistance plus 25%, that is going to be more useful than his other part of his defeat trait. Now, flaming attacks are fairly common, so reducing the damage by 25% is especially useful, especially if your Lord has regeneration, which will provide you a 20% weakness. That will actually make it so that your Lord, because there's a lot of Lords in the game that has regeneration by default, and there's a defeat trait that you can get for regeneration. We'll get into that in a little bit because it's a bit iffy, that one. So fire resistance is very useful. I'm going to put this, let's see, I'm going to put this above Malekith, but below Thorek Ironbrow, I think. Yeah, because it's only providing benefit to the actual Lord itself, not to the entire army. Alright, now we're moving on to Khorne. Scarbrand the Exiled provide the defeat trait Blood Quencher, which provides charge bonus for the Lord's army and weapon strength plus 8% for the Lord's army. Now, this is comparable to Thorek's defeat trait, where he's providing a base weapon strength plus 3. Not base weapon, like a base number. Armor piercing weapon strength plus 3. Where this is a percentage. So where this is going to be better is against if you've got an army filled with like really hard hitters. So for example, anything with a weapon strength above 100 is going to get at least 8 extra weapon strength. Whereas this will always just provide plus 3. But if you're using an infantry-based army, then you might only get plus 1 or even next to nothing from that weapon strength boost. So depending on the army that you've got, depends on what kind of boost you're going to get. So rolling around with the highest amount of damage dealing that you possibly can. Like, for example, if you're rolling around with like a Carnosaur Doomstack, then Scarbrand's defeat trait is going to be very desirable. I'm going to put it right next to Thorek, above Thorek, because I think... Oh, actually, no. Thorek's is probably going to be more useful in the early stages of the campaign, because you're more likely going to have infantry as opposed to big monsters. And the early game is more important than the late game, in my opinion. Because if you have a good early game, you'll have a good late game. Unless you deliberately screw it up. Okay, and then we're moving on to Kislev. So, Tsarina Katerin provides the defeat trait Ice Load Crusher, which enables frostbite attacks and causes terror when fighting against Kislev. Another terror one. Now, just like the dwarves, using terror against Kislev is not particularly useful because they have a lot of units that have high leadership, and they've also got By Our Blood, which causes them to become unbreakable for 30 seconds. And you won't be able to terrify them until they've gone through that By Our Blood, so that is not a very good stat to use against Kislev at all. But the Frostbite attacks is not too bad, and that's what stopped her from getting into D tier, but she's at the bottom of C tier in my opinion, because Frostbite attack doesn't do a hell of a lot, it just reduces the speed. So using the character with that defeat trait will just be good for slowing down the enemy advance. That's about it for that defeat trait. Then we've got Castalton here with Faith Breaker, which provides leadership plus 6 when in own territory for the Lord's army, which that's good, Lord-wide buff, but leadership, you know, a lot of armies in the game already have very high leadership, and then enables flaming attacks for that Lord. Again, that can be very iffy, that can actually be detrimental, because there's so many units and Lords in the game that just have loads of flame resistance by default, and they can sometimes be above like 50%. So having the flaming attacks, once you've got it, you can't get rid of it. And there are very few units in the game that are significantly weak against flaming attacks. So, for example, if you go up against something that's got regeneration, it's only a 20% weakness to fire. TombKings have like a 25% weakness to fire, but they can negate it completely if they're high enough level in their skill tree. WoodElves can completely negate their flaming weakness. There's just a lot that people can do to negate their flaming attacks. So I don't think it's a desirable defeat trait, so I'm going to put that down below Katerin's there at the bottom end of C. Just think, sometimes it's better not to have flaming attacks than to have it, and I also understand that flaming attacks reduces the amount of regeneration they do by 50%, but again, I just don't think that's particularly impactful for somebody who's fighting it in melee. You know, just not great. Anyway, Boris Ursus has the defeat trait, or gives the defeat trait Red Dead, which provides leadership plus 8 when fighting against Warriors of Chaos, Demons of Chaos, and Norsca. Now, the factions that are likely to get this defeat trait are Warriors of Chaos, Demons of Chaos, and Norsca, because they're close to him. But those are factions that also tend to fight Norsca, Warriors of Chaos, and Demons of Chaos. So it can be fairly useful for those factions. I'm going to put that one above above Katerin's, but only just. All three of these, so they're just not good defeat traits. So Kislev's not doing well so far, but Astankia's defeat trait is actually pretty good. So Mother Estankia provides the defeat trait Witch of the Woods, which provides targeting range for all spells. Winds of Magic Power Reserve, Winds of Magic Power Reserve capacity +5. Now in the wiki it does say Winds of Magic Power Reserve change +5% when increasing, so that's outdated on the wiki, but she does actually provide a Winds of Magic reserve capacity, and also provides spell resistance for the entire army of 5%. So this is a very impactful defeat trait regardless of what faction you're playing as, because a bit of extra spell resistance for your entire army is always going to be useful, because eventually they're going to come against a spellcaster, even if you're not using Winds of Magic yourself. So I'm going to put this one here as an A tier defeat trait, because it's better to have it for your entire army than just one character, even if it is a smaller amount. And I'm going to pop this actually below Repance right there, because yeah, that is a pretty significant amount of boost. Okay, then Lizardmen. So Krokgar's first with the defeat trait Saurus Smiter. Public Order +2 local province, melee defense +10. Now melee defense +10 is hugely beneficial for a lord, because most lords in the game, their primary purpose, especially if you've got a missile-based army, hold the enemy back, and having melee defense increases their chance to dodge a melee attack by 10%. That is extremely useful, especially if they're actually trying to duel a character. They'll just take less damage. This is equivalent to damage resistance that that Wurzag does. So I'm going to put this one here at A tier as well, at probably above Wurzag, because like Wurzag reduces physical attack damage, right? But it's not going to affect magical weapons, whereas melee defense will affect magic weapons because they can't bypass melee defense, so they still need to get past the character's melee defense to do it there. And then of course you've got the Public Order +2 on top of that, which there's no downside of that. It's all good. So I think that it's an A tier defeat trait, almost at S tier. I mean, we're really reserving the very best ones for S tier. Then we've got Lord Mazdamundi with the defeat trait Spawn Killer. Leadership aura size +25%. Useless, absolutely useless. Now, I wouldn't go so far as to say this is the worst defeat trait in the game. I still think that Grombrindles is worse. So, leadership aura size, obviously providing a small amount of leadership in a larger area. This is really only going to be slightly impactful for factions that are using low morale armies. I'm going to put this one right down here. This is an absolutely awful defeat trait, and 25% isn't even really that much of a aura increase size. I think that this will be pretty much universally despised defeat trait. It's just terrible. Then we've got Tehenowyn with the defeat trait Prophet of Doom, which provides casualties captured post-battle +15% for the Lord's Army, and Untainted +3 local province. So this one here, I don't imagine that the Untainted is that useful, and that'd be weird to get for Chaos factions. I'm actually not sure if it switches, but like it's your own corruption. So maybe Chaos factions will get +3 of their own corruption. I'm not 100% sure on that. But the casualties captured post-battle is the main benefit from this one. And that's going to be especially useful for DarkElves and for ChaosDwarfs. And everyone else will just get a bit of a boost of either casualty replenishment rate or extra income, depending on your post-battle loot options. So I think this one is alright. Probably at the back end of B tier. Let's see, where would I put this one? I put it maybe just above Astrogoth Iron Hand there. Because, yeah, getting more captives, that can really help your army out quite a bit, and your economy. Then we've got Out of the Skies. Sorry, we've got Tic-Tac-Toe with the trait Out of the Skies. Campaign movement range +10%, campaign line of sight +10%. Now, there is no situation whatsoever where your lord won't benefit from more campaign movement range. Being able to catch an enemy lord that's trying to run away from you, or being able to run away from a lord that is trying to catch you. So this is an S tier defeat trait and could save your ass in many situations, or could doom the enemy because you can actually catch them. But where would we put it? Because it's not a global bonus. It is kind of an army-wide bonus because the whole army is being moved along. I would say that this is kind of more valuable than melee defense. I'd even go so far as to say, yeah, I'd go above Miao Ying there, because that is such a good defeat trait, campaign movement range. That is really only not useful if you're a super passive player, which, I don't know, you still got to move at some point, so it'd be useful then. Then you've got Nakai the Wanderer with the defeat trait Wanderer No More, bonus versus large +10, melee defense +10. I think that this is actually better than Kroq-Gar's defeat trait, because I think that the bonus versus large is going to be more useful than the public order, and then of course it's providing the exact same amount of melee defense. Coupling both of these two together, providing 20 melee defense, is super good for making a one-man doom stack. So I'm going to put him above this one here, but since it's not a lord-wide buff, sorry, an army-wide buff, I really can't justify putting it above Malachi there. So these two are on par, but I think that Nakai's is better, and the bonus versus large is better than what Karth is providing by quite a significant amount. Well, it's actually +2, but still, he doesn't provide the melee defense. And then we've got Gorok providing the defeat trait Movable Mountain, which provides leadership +4 Lord's Army, and attribute expert charge defense for the Lord. So leadership +4 Lord's Army, that's okay. It's not a huge amount. Especially useful if you want to make a very specific army with Grimgor Ironhide, making a unkillable black orc immortals. So that's a good defeat trait for that, because the way that one works is that they don't take casualties until they drop below 50% of their base leadership. So the higher your leadership, the harder it is to drop below 50%. In fact, if you get your leadership to like 200, as an example, it's kind of impossible for the AI to deliver enough leadership penalties on you just by pure damage, making those immortals actually immortal. Of course, +4 is not going to help a huge amount on that, but it's better than nothing in that specific situation. I would say that overall, though, this is not a amazing defeat trait. I'd go so far as to put it at the very back end of B tier, just above C tier there, just because it is a Lord-wide buff. And then Oxiorol provides a defeat trait, one who hunts the unseen, gives Vanguard deployment for the Lord itself. I don't think this is very impactful at all, but it's better than the D tier ones. But I'd go so far, I'd put it maybe just above Boros Ursus there, but still just not great. You know, having your Lord being able to be a little bit closer at the start of the battle to the enemy army could be useful, or it might not be. It's just not super impactful most of the time. Okay, then just to give, I guess, a bit of a shout out to a defeat trait that doesn't exist anymore is Gotrek Gurnisons, because he is no longer a legendary lord that appears on the game. He is always a legendary hero, and he provided the defeat trait Legend Slayer. It is now no longer possible to slay me, to get the Legend Slayer trait, which provided Unbreakable. And that was a really good defeat trait. I probably would have put that at A or S tier, but it's gone now, and I don't see it coming back anytime soon. It's not possible to get it without mods. Whereas there's another defeat trait that we'll talk about soon, that it is possible to get without mods, that is not widely known about. Okay, then, moving on to Norsca, we've got Throg. He's got the defeat trait, or provides a defeat trait, Troll Hunter, which provides bonus versus large +15, so significantly more than what Nakai provides there. However, the weapon strength boost is +3%. Now, comparing that to these guys here, +3% in most cases might actually provide more than the Malice Darkblade. It depends on how much weapon strength the Lord has as a base. So for example, if the Lord has 100 weapon strength, it would provide 3 damage. If it had 300 weapon strength, it would provide 9 damage. Actually, you would need to have like hundreds of damage in order to provide more than these guys, wouldn't you? Now that I think about it, because to get to 30, you'd need like 1,000 damage. So yeah, it's actually lower than that. But it does also have the bonus versus large. You know, just doing maths in my head, failing me as always. Where would I put this? Because the bonus versus large is good, but the weapon strength buff is really quite low. I definitely think it's, because of the bonus versus large, it's B tier, but it's not super high in the B tier. I'd go maybe below Gorok. Yeah, let's go below Gorok with that one. Okay, and then Wulfric the Wanderer provides a defeat trait, Blood Feuder, which is bonus versus infantry +5, charge bonus +10%. That's not very much. So bonus versus infantry works similar to bonus versus large. If you're fighting a small unit, it's a melee attack and weapon strength buff. And it's 1/3 of what he provides. It's also the charge bonus +10%, but I don't consider charge bonus to be super valuable unless you're cycle charging a lot. I'd put this one at the top end of C tier because he provides a similar buff, because he provides the charge bonus as well. But I think the bonus versus infantry +5 is better than the reduced recruitment cost for cavalry there, but it's definitely not as good as Throg's defeat trait. Now, there is another Norscan defeat trait that you can get, but this is only for Cetra, It wasn't really worth making an entry here. If you are playing as Cetra and you defeat Surtha Ek, who is the faction leader for Varg, but he can be confederated into other factions, obviously. If you defeat him as Cetra, you can get the defeat trait Surtha Wrecked, which will give you 10 extra unit capacity for skeleton chariots and armor plus 10 for chariot units in the Lord's army. I don't consider it very valuable because personally I like to give Cetra Tomb Guard. I feel like he boosts them more than skeleton chariots, and skeleton chariots are low tier units that kind of get outdated fairly early, so I don't consider that very valuable. I would have put that one under D tier because I imagine 99.9% of you guys will just never get that defeat trait anyway. But again, just a sort of an honorable mention, I guess. Then there's Nurgle. Let's move on to that. So Kugath Plaguefather provides the defeat trait Air Freshener, which chance of plague spreading minus 80% for the Lord's army. That's pretty good. You know, not getting a plague spreading is definitely a good thing, especially when dealing with Skaven plagues. In many ways, I think Skaven plagues are way more dangerous than Nurgle plagues. It seems like they spread a lot faster, and the attrition caused by them seems to be way more impactful than some of the Nurgle stuff. The thing with the Nurgle plagues, it's more about buffing their own faction rather than destroying the other faction, whereas the Skaven plagues are more about destroying the other faction, except for Clan Pestilence, obviously. And he also provides growth plus 30 local province. I don't consider this a great defeat trait, but it's definitely not terrible. I put it above the Kislevite traits, putting it somewhere maybe above Oxyotl there. Then we've got Tamarkan the Maggot Lord. Oh, we've got some stuff to talk about here. He provides the defeat trait Tamarkant. Now, the wiki hasn't updated his defeat trait. Still got the old information here. Hero capacity plus 3 for all heroes, faction-wide. And global recruitment capacity plus 1. That, if it was still in effect, would have been friggin' S tier. Maybe even the S tier 1. However, that's not what it is anymore. It now provides hero experience gain plus 15% for all heroes attached to the army. So not a global bonus. And local recruitment capacity plus 1. So this goes from an S tier defeat trait all the way down to a C tier defeat trait. It's definitely not D tier because local recruitment capacity is good and extra experience for your heroes is good. But that is such a massive nerf. I think they massively over-nerfed that one. It's such trash now. Like, local recruitment capacity can certainly be good, but let's be real. If you defeated Tamarkan, your army is either really good and therefore doesn't need to recruit more, or you got totally smashed and you actually do need to recruit more. So it depends on how you look at it. So overall, I don't think it's a good defeat trait. Then you've got Epidemius with Enumerator's End. That provides research rate plus 10% and the attribute immune to contact effect for that particular lord. This is an S tier defeat trait, but I do think that Thorgrim's defeat trait is slightly better with the reduced construction cost. But, you know, if you're playing as a certain character that likes to go into melee and the enemy has, let's just say it's Slaanesh and they've got like Sopophoric Musk, having that defeat trait will not allow that to affect the Lord. But I would say that that's fairly situational and not particularly impactful. It's really all about that research rate there, which is very valuable to everyone except for the DaemonPrince, who starts off right next to him. So very useful defeat trait for the DaemonPrince. You gotta love how often, since the very start of the campaign, the DaemonPrince has just been shafted, except for all the regiments of renown that he gets. Anyway, the Ogre Kingdoms are next. So Greasus Goldtooth is providing the defeat trait Cashing Out. Income from trade plus 10% and income from all buildings plus 20% in the local province. So that income from trade is for tariffs only. I don't believe it increases the trade value of like all goods. It's just trade tariffs. Now that means it's probably going to provide you with maybe 5 to 10 extra income per trade agreement that you have, per trait of this that you have. So you can essentially use this to get an unlimited economy, if you get it a bazillion times, basically, doing it that way. But it's especially useful for lords that don't have supply lines. So Bretonnia, ChaosDwarfs, and Warriors of Chaos. Because in most cases with those factions, the upkeep cost of that lord alone will be lower than the amount of income that they'll be able to provide with that 20%. Because, let's just take Bretonnia as an example. Their upkeep of a lord, if they're dismounted, no need to give them a mount if they're just going to be punked in a region, is going to be about 250. So if they're plopped into a region that has, say, 1,300 base income, he will be providing a couple of extra gold points more than what he's actually costing. Now, Bretonnia's got some fairly high income regions, so getting that much through through base income is actually really easy to do. So popping it down into a region that maybe makes 4,000 or 5,000 income as a base income, you can end up making quite a lot by farming this trait, and then on top of the trade income. So this is not going to affect you on the battlefield at all, except for the fact that it will give you more money, allowing you to field more armies or better armies. So this one here is a bit weird in how you want to use it. I'm going to put it at the back end of A tier and just say that this is a weird defeat trait depending on how you want to utilize it. And, you know, for lords that don't have, that do have supply lines, you know, increasing the income in the region that they're in, plus 20%, you know, it's a bit of extra money. Helps to negate their upkeep costs a bit, I guess. Then we've got Scrag the Slaughterer, which provides the defeat trait Moors the Pity. And this one here provides Winds of Magic Power Reserve Capacity plus 8. So the wiki is actually correct here. They didn't have the old outdated stuff. Actually, I'm not entirely sure if he ever had the Winds of Magic when increasing one. I just can't remember if he ever had that. But yeah, the Winds of Magic Power Reserve Capacity plus 8. And Miscast Base Chance minus 10%. So this defeat trait here will only not affect Khorne. It can affect the Dwarfs as long as you get it on a Runesmith, Master Runesmith. Because you can't get it for the heroes that are attached in the army because it only affects the Lord. So giving it to a regular Dwarf Lord's useless. But the extra Winds of Magic Power Reserve Capacity, pretty good. Puts it kind of on par with Teclis. Teclis provides more Winds of Magic, but then there's the miscast base chance. Now that really only matters if you're going to overcast. So it depends. Some people like to overcast, some people don't. I'm going to put it slightly above Teclis just because of that. Because I think 2 Winds of Magic difference is negligible, but reducing miscast base chance is pretty good. Okay, then moving on to the Skaven, we've got Quick Head Taker with bonus versus infantry plus 10 with his defeat trait Vermin Flail. So better than Wulfric's defeat trait. I remember a long time ago I actually said that this was one of the worst defeat traits in the game. But that was before I realized that bonus versus infantry was also a melee attack buff as well. And it also used to be, I think, plus 6, so they've buffed it like a small amount. I think it's not as good as Throg's defeat trait, and it's better than Wulfric's by a tiny little bit. So I'm going to put him above Wulfric just by a tiny bit, because he also provides charge bonus, but it's double the bonus versus infantry, which I think is more valuable. Okay, then Lord Skrolk provides a defeat trait Plague Lash. Now this is a weird one because in the wiki it says plagues bolster your forces and nurture your settlements, Lord's army. That's weird because no, it doesn't, and it never has. It's never done that for the defeat trait. So I don't even know what that's even doing in there. That's a faction effect for Lord Skrolk. So this is weird there with the wiki. The other information's correct. Immune to Swamp Attrition, Lord's Army, Public Order, -5. So let me just reiterate what the actual defeat trait is, and just in case I modeled that all together. The actual defeat trait, Plague Lash, Immune to Swamp Attrition, Public Order, -5, Local Enemy Province. If you're reading the wiki and it says Plagues bolster your forces, that is incorrect. It does not do that. So, and I just checked that out. I went into a campaign to go and check that because I looked at that and it's like, no, it doesn't. Went and played as Gorok, played an easy campaign, went and got Skrolk's defeat trait, doesn't provide it. So that, I would say, is extremely low impact. Above D tier, but at the bottom end of C tier. Like, even below Tamarkan's defeat trait. Because Public Order -5 Local Enemy Province, on its own, isn't going to do much. It's only really going to be useful if you're really trying to revive enemy factions. And that's another video in on itself. And Immune to Swamp Attrition, there's not that much Swamp Attrition, and you can usually just avoid it quite easily anyway. So, fairly low impact. Then we've got Tzeentch Craventail with the defeat trait Craven by Name, providing speed +12 for the Lord and leadership +4 during subterranean intercept battles for the Lord's army. So at least he provides the leadership for the entire army. You friggin' you there that doesn't provide it except for the Lord. But the speed +12%, that's very good. Don't underestimate how valuable speed is. Tzeentch Craventail's defeat trait is very good because if you've got a spellcaster Lord, having them being able to avoid combat, very good. If you've got a melee Lord, being able to catch up to Lords that don't want to fight you, very good. So speed is one of the most underrated stats in the game. So 12%, I'm going to put that at A tier, and I'm going to put that below Imric. Yeah. Because I personally think that speed is really bloody good. Even if you're a slow character like Thorgrim Grudgebearer, being able to move a bit faster, very useful. Okay, then we've got Ikit Claw. The defeat trait is a fitting end, ? That's what it says here. That's what the defeat trait is. It's actually a question mark. And it provides, okay, it's outdated on the wiki, but this is what it says on the wiki. I'll read that out first, and then I'll tell you what it actually is. Winds of Magic Power Reserve change, plus 10% when increasing. That's just outdated there. It actually provides Winds of Magic Power Reserve capacity plus 10, and then research rate plus 10 faction wide. Now this one is better than Thorgrim's because it provides the Winds of Magic Power Reserve, which I think is more impactful than the reduced construction cost. And it's definitely better than Teclis's one. And then, of course, you've got the research rate on top of that. So, Ikit Claw, anytime he's showing up in any tier list, he's always getting S tier, isn't it? Even if he's the one to be defeated. He's like strong to go up against, strong to play as. He's always an S tier character. Okay, then moving on to Deathmaster Tzeentch. He provides the defeat trait, Deathmaster by nature. Hero action success chance plus 4% local region. Ooh, 4%, that's so huge. And attribute Stalk. Not super valuable. Stalk is a bit more valuable in Warhammer 3 than it was in 2, but it was also more valuable at the beginning of Warhammer 3 when you used to be able to send a Stalk character to go and capture a settlement. Now, since the enemy army will actually target your lords again, Stalk is kind of not as valuable. So this is a defeat trait that kind of shifts back and forth between being total trash and being kind of good, and then being total trash again. I'd say this is somewhere in the total trash capacity at the moment, because once you're stalked, you can't turn it on and off, and sometimes it's good for your lord to actually be discovered, because you can use them as bait. So I'm going to put that... It's not completely useless. Some lords can definitely make use of it. I'm going to put that, it's definitely C tier, but where in C tier? I'd say that's on par with, probably below Oxyodal's defeat trait there. Okay, and then we got Throt the Unclean with the defeat trait Deep Cleaner. This is universally a great defeat trait with hit points plus 10% for the Lord. So even if your Lord isn't someone that's going into combat, the enemy is going to try to target you, and having 10% extra health is fantastic. Coupling that with extra regeneration, that means you get more regeneration capacity as well. So this is just a great defeat trait. I don't know if I'd really go so far as to put it as S tier, because it doesn't provide a bonus to the entire army, and damage resistance in many ways is kind of better than extra hit points, but then it depends on how you look at it. So because it's just a flat hit point bonus, I'm going to put it below, I'm going to put it above Nakai there. Because it's usually, this is more impactful for every single lord in the game, whereas this one is better for lords that are really getting into the thick of combat, whereas that lord could be getting shot, as in if you've got the defeat trait, and the extra hit points will still come in handy there. Depends on how you look at it. These are all like a 10% boost to the lord in some way or another. Okay, then moving on to Nakari, so Slaanesh. The trait is called Tyrion Owes Me. It provides experience gain plus 7% for lords and heroes faction wide, and then speed plus 6% for the Lord's army. So faction wide buff and a Lord buff. Suck on that, Tamrakhan, you fuck. This guy is going way above it and is actually an S tier defeat trait. Where I would put it, because speed plus 6% for the Lord's army, that can be really useful for certain armies, especially cavalry based armies, which I imagine most of you aren't going to have. But also the faction wide buff of experience gain, that's so good. Get this trait a few times and you'll be able to level up your character super quickly. But where would I put it? Probably above Miao Ying. Probably, I'd actually put it above Tic-Tac-Toe, but below Epidemias. Super good defeat trait there. Really, really, really good. Especially for the HighElves, who start off really near him. Well, 4 of them do at least. Okay, then... Legend, it's three HighElves that start near, start on Ulthuan. Yeah, but Elithanar starts near there. He's near Ulthuan. He gets there pretty early. Anyway. So, moving on to the Empire now. We've got Karl Franz with the defeat trait Reichshammer. So, unit experience gain plus 10% for the Lord's army. So much better than what it used to be, which was causes terror when fighting against Empire. But at the same time, terror against the Empire is not so bad versus, the Dwarfs. Unit experience gain plus 10% for the Lord's army. This is good. This just allows you to get unit ranks a lot faster. However, it is not a huge boost. 10% is not a lot, so it's not a huge amount of impact. And if your army is already like maxed out experience, then it doesn't provide any further benefit. I think it's better than most of the C tier ones. I'm just thinking where I should put it. Maybe at the bottom of B tier. Especially good for Warriors of Chaos since they really value experience gaining. Because they oftentimes need to get experience gain, then it gets reset because of the Warband upgrade. But yeah, I'd put it at the bottom of B tier there. I just don't think it's a fantastic defeat trait. But at the same time, it's not terrible either. Okay, then we've got Volkmar the Grim with the defeat trait Grimsbane. Melee defense and melee attack +3 for the Lord's army for melee infantry unit. So when it comes to Miao Ying, she just provides it to every unit in the army. For this one, it has to be specifically a melee infantry unit. So this is particularly good for VampireCounts, which will have a lot of melee infantry. Really good for Scarbrand, who will have a lot of melee infantry. So the people that are in the general, and the TombKings as well, people who are around Volkmar will get a lot of benefit out of this. But again, if you're not going to utilize those units, don't get the defeat trait. So it's very situational. But it's a good situational one. I would put this at the upper end of A tier, just because of it is a pretty significant boost for melee infantry. I would put it... I'd probably go and put it as on par with Malachi McCason's defeat trait there. Yeah, but just below it a little bit. Alright, then we've got Balthazar Gelt, providing the defeat trait Metal Storm, +6 armor for all units, Lord's Army. Now, Zhao Ming provides +5 armor for the Lord's Army, but also provides magic item drop chance. I kind of consider the magic item drop chance to make this a little bit better than Balthazar Gelt, but because they are almost identical defeat traits, I'm going to put them right next to each other, but I think that Zhao Ming's is slightly better, because magic items are great. So is armor, but I think magic items are better. Okay, so then we've got Marcus Wolfheart with the defeat trait Hunted Down. Missile resistance +10 for the Lord, and missile damage +5% for the Lord's Army. So half the amount of missile strength for the Lord's Army that what Malachi provides, but he also provides missile resistance, which is good for every army. So I'm going to put this one at A tier above Malachi there, even though one of the stats is slightly lower. Because if we have a look, Morga is providing missile resistance, and he's already in A tier, and he's providing an additional buff. Because it depends if you've even got missile units in the army as well. Same thing with him. So a little bit situational with that. Then we've got Elspeth von Draken, providing the defeat trait A Rose by any other name. Provides explosive missile damage +5% Lord's Army, and missile explosion radius +10% Lord's Army. Now this basically requires that you have artillery in the army. So it's very similar, I suppose, to Zatan's defeat trait, because that is not going to provide any benefit to small arms fire, unless those small arms fires are like the Outriders with grenade launchers. So I'd say it's definitely an A tier defeat trait. Situational. I'm going to put it below Zatan the Blacks. Actually, I'm going to put it below Thoric Ironbrow. Actually, below Scarbrand as well. Because I kind of consider range to be more impactful than the explosion radius. Again, it really depends on the units that you're using. Funnily enough, the defeat trait that Elspeth provides is best used for the Empire, who is less likely to fight her. Like, if you're playing as Greenskins or VampireCounts, you're not really making much use of it. So it's kind of a weird defeat trait. But I don't know. I feel like it's still A tier. It's just a weird one. TombKings now. So Cetra the Imperishable has 2 defeat traits. So 99.999% of the time, you will get the trait Cetra the Perishable, which will provide charge bonus +15 and public order -3 local enemy province, which again, similar to Scrolls, not super impactful, and charge bonus +15, not super impactful. I haven't rated that particularly highly. And then for his other defeat trait that he provides, which is only available to Surtha Ek. So you have to play as either Throg or Wulfric. You have to confederate Varg. You have to keep Surtha Ek alive, get him down to Cetra, defeat Cetra, assuming Cetra's still alive, because Cetra gets wiped out quite often, and you'll get the defeat trait that is only available to a non-legendary lord, to Surtha Ek, called True Chariot Master, which will provide weapon strength +100% for Chaos Chariot units Lord's Army, which is fucking huge boost compared to what he provides to Cetra in the opposite situation. So in that particular one, that is like S tier, because those units are pretty damn good for Surtha Ek. But for the everyone else in the army, everyone else in the game, it's like C tier. Like maybe just a little bit above Wulfric, maybe actually below it. Yeah, above Luin Leoncoeur, but below Wulfric. Not a good defeat trait. Okay, then we've got Grand Hierophant Ketep, providing the defeat trait Not So Grand Hierophant, which provides Winds of Magic. Okay, so the wiki is wrong here. It says Winds of Magic Power Reserve +15% when increasing Lord's Army. That's not correct. it now provides Winds of Magic Power Reserve capacity. I don't think it's 15%. I think it's actually 10%. I'm not 100% sure on that, about the capacity. I just don't think it's 15% because that's actually quite high. I think, yeah. And then it's immune to Desert Attrition, Lord's Army, and immune to Sandstorm Attrition. Actually, just give me 1 second and I'll just verify that. Yeah, so it's definitely not 15, it's at +8. So the Grand Hierophant Katep, on the wiki, it's wrong. It says Winds of Magic Power Reserve change, plus 15% when increasing, but it's actually Winds of Magic Power Reserve capacity, +8. Immune to Desert Attrition, Lord's Army, and immune to Sandstorm Attrition, that's correct. So this one here, it's definitely better than Teclis's defeat trait because it's also providing immunity to attrition of common attrition. Like, there's a lot of desert area, so I'd put it just above Teclis there. And also Sandstorm Attrition largely depends on whether or not you're going up against TombKings and they put down that particular Sandstorm, which is a lot of the time. So an A-tier defeat trait there. Then we've got High Queen Khalida providing the defeat trait Khalida Never Living, which provides Diplomatic Relation +30 with vampire accounts and Recruit Rank +2 for missile units. Now, I don't know about you, but that's pretty low value. That's only really useful if you're playing as vampire accounts, because why would you even bother negotiating with vampire accounts anyway? Because if you're playing as vampire accounts, getting relations with vampire accounts will allow you to confederate vampire accounts, which is pretty good. So it's only really good for them. So I'd put this at C tier, because recruit rank for missile units is not too bad. But I'd go so far as to put it probably above Oxyodal's defeat trait there. I mean, if you get it enough times, there's nothing stopping you from being friendly with the vampire accounts just so they don't attack you, because otherwise they probably will. But I don't know. This is a weird one, I guess. Then we've got Arkan the Black with the defeat trait Arkan the Blackened, which provides Diplomatic Relations +20 with TombKings, Weapon Strength +25% when fighting against the vampire accounts. That's just for the Lord. Very similar sort of defeat trait. Now here's the thing with the TombKings. They're usually pretty friendly. If you're fairly strong, the TombKings don't really care much about you. Only if you like really stab them in the back. They're just not really an aggressive faction. They're very strange with that. So getting the Diplomatic Relations +20 with TombKings, I don't think it's that valuable either, because it's pretty easy to become friendly with them even without it. And Weapon Strength when fighting against vampire accounts just for Lord. I mean, if you want to get it as Carl Franz, go defeat him and then go and finish off Vlad. Seems like a bit of effort. So I don't think this is very high value as well. I'm going to put this under Khalida. I just don't think it's super high value at all. Then we're moving on to Tzeentch. So Kairos Fate Weaver's defeat trait is Winds of Magic Power Reserve capacity +5 Lord's Army. So that's correct. They've actually updated that on the wiki. And spell resistance +15% for the Lord's Army, which is a huge amount of spell resistance. So if we have a look at Astankia, who has 5% and provided some Winds of Magic, and same amount of Winds of Magic Power Reserve, this is providing 3 times as much spell resistance. It's definitely going to get higher than that. In fact, I might even go so far as to put this as S tier at the back end of it, because that is a lot of spell resistance. That'll really help your army when getting casted. And again, if you're fighting against Tzeentch, then you're probably going to really want that spell resistance, because they like to spam those spells. So that's a really good defeat trait. Then we've got the Changeling with the defeat trait Final Trick. That provides post-battle chance of stealing a magic item +10% and hero action success chance +5% local region. So weird thing with the Changeling is that you will probably only ever fight him once in a campaign, because once his army has been defeated, he never rebuilds it ever again. He never comes back as a faction. Actually, I think he can actually revive himself. I'm not sure. Just can't remember. I think because he's a Horde faction. But anyway, with him, yeah, post-battle chance of stealing a magic item is not too bad. But the hero action success chance +5 local region, it's not great. It's very similar to Alithanar's defeat trait, but I guess the post-battle chance of stealing a magic item is a little bit better. It's definitely C tier in my opinion, and I'd go so far as to put it probably behind Tamarkan there, but ahead of Skrull, because it's just not very good. And again, you'll probably only get it once in a campaign. Then there's the VampireCoast. So we've got Luther Harkon. His defeat trait is 1 down, X to go. Spell resistance +15%. Leadership +10 when fighting at sea. That's just for the Lord. So leadership when fighting at sea, that's trash. Situational, that belongs in D tier. But the spell resistance +15%. So where's Azag? Where do we put him again? Azag is... Where did we put, there he is. Okay, so Azag's providing 30%, and Ostrogoth's providing 15%. Ostrogoth's secondary effect is probably just as obscure as Luther Harkon's, but I actually think that his is better. So I'm going to put him behind Ostrogoth, because they both do 15% spell resistance there. Because that's where I feel like it should go. Yeah. We should put like similar traits close together. It doesn't make sense to put them wildly far apart. Okay, then there's Count Noctilus with Dreadfleet Drowned. Leadership +5 when fighting against VampireCoast, Lord's Army, and Leadership +5 when fighting at sea. Ugh, very situational. Really trashy. Leadership, I mean, these guys are... They always cause fear because they're undead. But it's just... It's only against one faction. And it's not a super common faction. I'd say that this is probably above Elithanar's, but it's a D tier defeat trait. It's not good. It's very, very much not good. Then we've got Aranessa Saltspite, Consigned to Drink, Income from Sacking Settlements +15%, and Passability Regeneration when fighting at sea. So regeneration's great when fighting at sea. You're just not going to make use of that very often. Income from Sacking Settlements. Some factions will make a fair bit of use out of that, especially the chaotic ones, especially Greenskins. So it's still not a great defeat trait. So where would I put it? Probably in C tier. Let's see, where would I put it? I'd say it's maybe above Khalida's defeat trait, just slightly. Yeah, but it's still not great. Then we've got Silostra Dirfan, whatever you want to say it, with Siren Extinguished. She provides Winds of Magic Power Reserve capacity. Hang on, I need to confirm exactly how much she provides because the wiki here is wrong. Just bear with me 1 second. Yeah, okay, so the wiki says Winds of Magic Power Reserve change +15% when increasing. That's incorrect. It's actually Winds of Magic Power Reserve +10, and then miscast base chance -5%. So her defeat trait is better than Teclis's because it provides the same amount of Winds of Magic and provides miscast base chance, but less than what Scrag has, so she goes right underneath him. Okay, so then moving on to the VampireCounts now. Manfred von Carstein provides a defeat trait Moonslaker, -50% attrition caused by Vampire Count territory attrition. Not really ideal. It's just not that impactful. Most of the time you can avoid this attrition anyway. And once the vampire attrition is gone, it's just not going to be an effect. So it's very situational, and even when fighting against VampireCounts, you can usually avoid it with like in camp stance and stuff like that. So I don't think it's D tier. I'd put it at the very bottom of C tier there. It's just really just not a good defeat trait. Then we've got Helman Gorst with Gorst or Ghost, which enables poison attacks for the Lord. Poison attacks are okay. It's just for the Lord, not for the entire army. That will reduce the enemy's strength and speed by a little bit, by about 15%. It's not too bad. Will help with dueling. So I'm going to put that one... So that's definitely like kind of on par with like getting a melee defense +10. If you're reducing the enemy damage that's being inflicted to you by 15%, that's pretty good. And that'll last for 10 seconds every time you hit it. Maybe that should be just a bit above, because some lords will get it by default, and you can only have one contact effect at a time, and some lords will have other contact effects, like dazed, or like you could, for example, if you've got this defeat trait and Catarins, you can only have one of them at a time. You can only do one contact effect. You can't have poison and frostbite. You can't have both. But this is definitely better than frostbite, so I'd say put it below Krokgar. Oh, no, put it below Wurzag there. That feels weird putting him there with his poison attacks ahead of Ungrim. Yeah, below you. Below you. Okay, there you go. Yeah, I think that's where it belongs. Poison attacks are good. I mean, A tier is good. It's just that all this other stuff over here I think is a little bit better. Okay, then we've got Vlad von Carstein with the defeat trait Undeath Descendant, which reduces the wound recovery time by -4. Now, for me, personally, this is useless because my lords just never get wounded. I'm just kidding. It does happen from time to time. So that basically means they just come back straight away. Now, funny enough that this defeat trait is most useful for Vlad von Carstein campaigns, right? Or Vampire campaigns, because what you can do with this one here is playing as Vlad von Carstein, you can Give the defeat trait to an enemy legendary lord or not, enemy faction leader by losing on purpose, and then turning their last remaining settlement into a sack city, so that their lord comes back every single turn, and then you use one of your lords, not Vlad necessarily, to just sack that settlement and kill that lord every single turn, and getting blood kisses. So it's a bit of a weird one. So I'm going to put this up pretty high, just because of that. And there's various ways that you can use this. It can potentially be a very cheesy one to do. It could also be useful to have like a lord in reserve that is super strong with Vlad's defeat trait that you can recruit in an emergency situation to defend a settlement. And if they get killed, well, so be it. At least they fought to the death and then just come back the next turn. So I'm gonna put him at A tier, and I'm gonna put him at the top of A tier because honestly, wound reduction time. There's a lot you can do with that. That's pretty damn good. Really good for the AI too. So you want to prevent them from getting it. Okay, and then we've got Isabella von Carstein with the defeat trait Cruelty Restrained. Excuse me. So this provides passive ability Regeneration. This defeat trait is really good to couple with Imric's defeat trait, which I mentioned earlier, because this will give your lord a fire weakness of 20%, and then Imric will just negate it. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, oh, but Isabella von Carstein is a hero now, not a lord. Now, I didn't say this would be an easy defeat trait to get, but it is possible to get for everyone except for Vlad. Vlad is the only character that can't get it. But he's also the only one that doesn't need it because he got regen on his own. Anyway, so this is how you get it. You have to play as anyone but Vlad. Then you have to defeat Vlad von Carstein. Then you have to revive Vlad von Carstein at either Castle Drakenhof or Schwarzhafen. One of those two settlements. So you have to cause a revolt in that settlement, and the revolt has to win against the settlement. It'll revive Sylvania. When Sylvania comes back, Isabella von Carstein will come back as a legendary lord and as a legendary hero, allowing you to get the defeat trait. Now, if you're playing as a different vampire count faction, that will allow you to confederate Vlad von Carstein and get Isabella von Carstein as a lord and as a hero. Although only one of them can equip the Blood Chalice at a time because it is a unique item. So, yeah, that's what we can do with that. So this one here is an S tier one, but it's also it's time consuming to get. I'm going to put that below, what's it called? Kairos's defeat trait. Because while Regeneration essentially gives your lord potentially 75% extra health, so it's way better than this. It does require time to get it, and it doesn't provide any army-wide boosts or global boosts like that, but it's a very good defeat trait for sure. You can make a very strong lord with that. The only lords that really don't benefit from it, I suppose, are ones that are just never going to take damage, like ones, maybe spellcaster lords that just stay out of the fight. But as I've said previously, sometimes you go up against an overwhelming enemy and you're just going to take damage. Okay, then we've got Heinrich Kemmler with the defeat trait Lich Killer, which provides spell resistance for the lord's army. So Kairos Fate Weaver having 15% and Astankia having 5%. It has to be somewhere between there. I don't think this belongs in S tier. He also doesn't provide any magic reserves where Astankia does. Spell resistance is definitely good. I'd say it's maybe above Astankia by just a little bit. It depends on what you value, but spell resistance is definitely good for everyone. Okay, then we've got the Warriors of Chaos stuff. So Archaon the Everchosen with the defeat trait Doomslayer. So he used to provide immune to psychology in Warhammer 2. Man, I'm glad they changed that. That would have been a D tier defeat trait. But now it provides spell resistance for the Lord, 10%, physical resistance plus 5%, melee attack plus 2 when fighting against Warriors of Chaos, Demons of Chaos, Norsca, and Beastmen for the Lord's army. So that's especially useful because once you've beaten him, you've probably still got to fight him again because he usually has more than one army, and it sometimes takes a bit of time to get rid of him. So I'm going to put him at... Where am I going to put him? I don't think it's an S tier defeat trait, but it's definitely a really good one. I'm going to put it at... Because he provides less physical resistance than Wurzag, but it's also spell resistance on top of that. I'm going to put him just above Wurzag, actually, just because of all the other effects that he provides. Definitely an A tier defeat trait, yeah. Okay, then there's Azazel, who provides leadership plus 4 for the Lord's army and weapon strength plus 3% for all Lords and embedded heroes for the Lord's army. Now, 3% is not very much. It'll count to 3 to 9, but like not very much, like 10 extra weapon strength, not a big deal, very low impact. And leadership +4 for the entire army, that's not too bad, that has some value. Since we did Gorok before at like B tier, I feel like it belongs in a similar state there, maybe a little bit higher than Gorok, because it's very similar sort of traits. Then we've got Be'lakor with the trait Bell of the Ball, which provides Winds of Magic Power Reserve Capacity +5, Lord's Army, Control +2, Local Province, Casualty Replenishment Rate +5, Lord's Army, Weapon Strength +5, Lord's Army. So the reason why there's like 4 different effects is supposed to represent one of each of the Chaos Gods. So the first one, Winds of Magic Power Reserve Capacity, is supposed to be Tzeentch. Control +2, I believe, is supposed to be Slaanesh. Casualty Replenishment Rate is supposed to represent Nurgle, and Weapon Strength is supposed to represent Khorne. So if the Fey Enchantress was an S tier with just Casualty Replenishment Rate, although hers was 10%, I feel like this belongs right next to her there, at maybe just a little bit above, because that provides more benefits, just in different areas, just depending on how you want to make use of it. So I think it's slightly better defeat trait. Then we've got Festus the Leech Lord that has the defeat trait Doctor Retired, which provides Casualty Replenishment Rate +5% for the Lord's Army, and Vigor Loss Reduction -15% for the Lord's Army. Now, Vigor Loss Reduction is definitely good, but I definitely think that Casualty Replenishment Rate is more valuable. He's going to go up in S tier, but below Fey Enchantress, because I think that 15% Vigor Loss Reduction is not as impactful as an additional 5% replenishment rate. Okay, then we've got Kolek Suneater, who has the defeat trait Stormblight, which provides bonus versus large +20. Now, comparing that to Nakai over here, who provides, I think it was 15, he isn't providing melee defense, so I don't think it's quite as valuable there. I would go so far as to put him, let's see, where was Rakath? Rakath was there. He was providing 8, so we should go above Rakath. Imrik provides fire resistance, so I'll go below Imrik right there. In fact, go below Tzeentch. Yeah, I think that's where he belongs there. So A tier, sort of in the mid sort of A tier there. And then we've got Prince Sigvald the Magnificent with the defeat trait Pride Assassin, post-battle chance of stealing a magic item +10%, and physical resistance +10%. Very similar to Wurzag's defeat trait, except he provides the post-battle chance of stealing a magic item. So Wurzag is right there. I'd put it just above Wurzag, but below Archaon. It largely depends on what you're focusing on. If you're trying to make a one-man doom stack, then Sigvald is more desirable because of that physical resistance, but post-battle, it just depends on how you want to look at it, because you're also getting spell resistance and melee attack for the entire army for Archaon when fighting against Chaos. Then you've got Valkyr the Bloody with the defeat trait Queen Dethroned, which provides melee attack +4 and armor-piercing weapon damage +20, almost identical to Hellebron. It's at just 1 melee attack lower. So it's freaking identical, so it just goes right next to her, just below her. And then with Village the Curseling, you've got the defeat trait Conjoined Separated, which provides Winds of Magic Power Reserve change. This one's incorrect. The wiki says Winds of Magic Power Reserve change +10% when increasing, but I'm fairly sure it's Winds of Magic Power Reserve +8 or +10. It's something, one of those two. And it's melee defense +5. So this is a good defeat trait if you're similar to these guys here, because he's providing 5 melee defense where they're providing 10, but he's also providing Winds of Magic capacity where they're not. So I'm actually going to put him in between Nakai and... No, you know what? I'm going to put him ahead of Nakai, because Winds of Magic, I think, is more important than bonus versus large, but it depends on the situation. Okay, so that's Warriors of Chaos done, and now we're moving on to the Wood Elves. Dryka has a defeat trait Destroyer of Dryads, which makes you immune to Athaloran attrition, which is useful in a situation for a short amount of time, because invading Athaloran can be a pain with that attrition, so being immune to it is definitely good. Because even if you own a region within Athaloran, unless you own the Oak of Ages, you'll still take the attrition, unless you get the defeat trait. And then -5 control for the local enemy province is only really useful when reviving factions. So I think it's pretty low impact, because you're not going to spend that much of your time in a campaign invading Athaloran, although Athaloran can be a massive pain. I'm going to put this pretty low down. Where did I put Skrolk? Because it's on a similar tier to that. Skrolk, I put him... Yeah, he's right there. I'll put it a little bit above Skrolk. That's it. Or maybe above the change thing there, just a bit. Not super impactful. And then Durthu has the defeat trait Tree Surgeon. Enable flaming attacks when fighting against Wood Elves. Crap. Because there is not there are a few units in the Wood Elf roster that are weak against fire, but in their tech tree they actually have an ability to negate their fire weakness. So you could end up actually being weak against Wood Elves with flaming attacks. Although the AI tends not to research that one for a really long time, so usually okay with that. Overall, though, not a good defeat trait because it's so situational. The Wood Elves are not a common enemy. So that one is going to go at the very top of D tier, I think. It goes above Noctilus's defeat trait. Then we've got Orion. His defeat trait is Wild Hunter. Leadership +4 during forest battles. Melee attack +5 during forest battles. So, I mean, very situational. It depends on the terrain. I'd put that at the very bottom of C tier, maybe just above Manfred there, because again, only on those particular maps will you get it, and that's that's only for the Lord as well. Yeah, no C tier for you. D tier, top of D tier. Get out of here, Orion. It's garbage. It's not even for the entire army. Okay, then you've got Sisters of Twilight with the defeat trait Twilight Extinguished, which provides casualty replenishment rate +20% for the Lord, for the Lord. And then missile strength for that Lord. So that is only really useful for archer-based Lords. So there's not that many of them. But that can also increase the strength of casting fireballs or casting... actually, I'm not 100% sure on that one. I shouldn't say that. I'm because they do count as missile strength. I'm just not 100% sure. Because it doesn't really... I would need to do a fair bit of research on that one. On the magic missiles that are technically missile attacks. But yeah, if you were playing as someone like a Lithanar, then this would be a good defeat trait for him, but it's very situational. Casualty replenishment rate for the Lord +20% means that you will heal a lot faster just for the Lord, not for the entire army though. It can be a little bit of a misconception. I think this belongs in C tier, probably just above Dryker. I just don't think it's very high value. It's just, there's only a few Lords in the game that's really going to want this defeat trait. And there we go. There is the Legendary Lord defeat trait. I think this might be the longest tier list so far in terms of time spent on it. So let me know in the comments below what you think, whether you agree or disagree with any of these. Let me know if I was right or wrong with any of the various wiki changes. I was pretty sure I'm right about all the changes and that I was correct about all of the defeat traits, but you know, let me know if I'm wrong and I can make some changes next time. Anyway, that's the end of this one. I appreciate you guys. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you next time. Later, guys.